I met the shepherd. I met the shepherd on a night train through Romania. The train ran from Brașov to Sighișoara, a short journey really, but the train moved slowly, delightfully slowly, as though it had no hurry itself and understood that this landscape deserved to be watched. It was late summer. The air smelled of hay just cut and warm resin, and through the open window came a breeze from the mountains, cool and clean, and carrying the scent of thyme growing wild on the slopes. He was sitting in the corner of the compartment, a large man with broad shoulders and a face that looked like the mountains themselves, weathered and furrowed and full of creases that told their own stories. His beard was white, thick and uncombed, and his eyes had this particular color, a pale gray, almost silver, like mountain stream water. He wore a thick wool jacket, hand-knitted, with patterns I didn't recognize, but that looked old, ancient, as though someone had been stitching the same designs into the same wool for centuries. Resting on his lap was a hat, a wide-brimmed felt hat, black with age, and beside it, a staff, a long shepherd's crook of pale wood with a carving at the top, a ram's head with curling horns. I admired the staff and asked if he was a shepherd. He nodded slowly, thoughtfully, the way someone moves who's used to taking time with everything he does. "Since I can remember," he said. "My father was a shepherd, and his father before him. We are shepherds the way mountains are mountains. It's not what we do, it's what we are." He told me about his mountains, the Carpathians, which he knew like his own face. Every path, every rock, every spring. He knew where the first crocuses bloomed in spring, where the best pasture lay in summer, where mushrooms grew in autumn, and where the snow fell deepest in winter. 200 sheep, he said. 200 sheep and 3 dogs and myself. Up there all summer, on the high pastures, where the air's so thin you can sense the stars even in daylight. "The mornings," he said, "the mornings up on the high pasture. You have to experience them. You wake before the sun and everything's gray and still, fog filling the valleys, thick as wool. The sheep huddle together, warm and quiet, and the dogs lie among them, barely lifting their heads. And then, slowly, so slowly, the sky in the east grows lighter, first gray, then rose, then gold, and the mountain peaks catch the light, one after another, like candles being lit. And the fog begins to lift, so gently, as though someone's drawing a blanket off the world. And beneath it lies the valley, green and fresh and gleaming with dew." He told me about the evenings, when the sun disappears behind the mountains and the sky takes on colors no painter can capture. Violet and orange and a deep, rich red that slowly becomes blue. Then he sits in front of his hut, a small stone cottage with a thatched roof his grandfather built, and simply watches how the colors transform, how the stars appear one by one. First the bright ones, then the faint ones, until the whole sky is full. He told me what it sounds like when 200 sheep settle for the night. A rustling first, a scuffling, quiet bleating. The lambs seeking their mothers, the mothers answering with deep, comforting calls. Then it grows quieter, layer upon layer, until only breathing remains. 200 creatures breathing together, like a single great organism. And the bells, he said, The little bells on the neck of the lead sheep. They ring softly in sleep when a sheep shifts, cuddles against the next one. A delicate, silvery ringing in the night, like music, like a lullaby the mountains sing. And the sheep lie on the pasture, content and full, and the dogs sleep, and the crickets sing, and the stream burbles nearby. And there's no place in the world where he'd rather be. I asked if he's ever lonely. Up there, alone, week after week. And he looked at me with those silver-grey eyes and said, "Lonely? I'm never alone. I have my sheep, and each one has a name and its own character. I have my dogs, who are cleverer than most people. I have the mountains, and they talk to me. Not in words, but in how they change. How the wind sweeps around the peaks. How the light plays on the rocks. How the snow comes and goes. The mountains are always talking. You just have to learn to listen." And then he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "The mountains teach you patience. Not the sort of patience you learn waiting in a queue. Not the patience you need when someone's late. But true patience. The patience of stone, lying still for millions of years without moving. The patience of grass, returning every spring, year after year, without doubt. The patience of water, which shapes the hardest rock not through strength, but through time. This patience, you learn it in the mountains, because you see there that everything has its season, that nothing comes too early and nothing too late, that summer comes when spring is finished, that night comes when day has had enough, and all you have to do is be there, be awake, and wait, without fear, without haste." The train pulled into Sigishwara station, and he stood slowly, took his hat and his staff, and nodded to me, like an old tree bending in the wind. Not much, just enough. Then he got off into the warm summer night, and I watched him cross the platform, upright and unhurried, with the rhythm of a man who'd spent his whole life walking mountain paths. Never quick, never slow, always exactly right. The patience of the mountains. I've carried those words with me since. The patience of stone, the patience of grass, the patience of water. In moments when I'm impatient, when I want something to move faster, arrive sooner, be finished already, I think of him, of his silver-grey eyes, of his hands which have stroked so many sheep, of his voice as quiet as the mountains themselves. The train carries on, and outside it's dark and still. The rattle of the wheels has grown quieter, or I've grown used to it. It's like a heartbeat now, my own, or the train's. I can't tell them apart anymore. My eyes are heavy, and I think of mountains, of sheep on a high pasture, of stars above the Carpathians. So many stars, so much stillness, so much patience. You notice it first at the window, the damp patter against the pane, a gentle drumming that slowly builds. The rain comes, the way it always comes, first hesitantly, then decisively. The night outside is black as ink, and you close your eyes to hear only the sound. It's a sound that's accompanied you for decades, since earliest childhood. And it's changed almost not at all. Patter, drum, sing. The old melody of wetness, of becoming, of renewing. The carriage lurches slightly, the wheels singing their monotonous song beneath you. Somewhere ahead, the locomotive snorts, and you ask yourself how late it really is. The clock glows in the dark, midnight, but that's become irrelevant. Time stretches out between the stations, becomes something supple, viscous. You know this state, when the world outside the window no longer exists, and only your compartment remains, your breath, the rain out there. It's the time of memories, the only time they really come alive. It's time you've always loved, since you were young. Then, quite suddenly, the window beside you opens, just a crack wide, just wide enough for a handful of night. The rain rushes louder now, and with it comes the scent. You open your eyes, and suddenly the whole world is present. The wetness in the air, the cool on your skin, the patter now louder, more direct. It's this scent, this very specific, unmistakable scent of rain on warm stone. Earth, mineral, something sweet, something sharp, all at once, and your heart makes a small leap. It's a scent not everyone knows, not everyone recognizes, but you know it as well as your own face. And then you're not here anymore. You're not in the train, not in this night. You're in Trieste, 50 years ago. More? It makes no difference anymore. It was summer, high summer, a summer like no other, and the heat lay over the piazza like an invisible cloth, thick and heavy and impossible to escape. The stones beneath, that particular reddish limestone the Romans had brought on ships, stored the sun, gave it back as heat waves, and if you'd walked barefoot, you'd have burned your souls. The city was full of people, voices, music from somewhere in the windows, and yet you were alone in it, completely alone, like someone who'd just come from the water and didn't quite dry off. You sat at that table, do you remember? The small table with the wobbly chair right beside the fountain. Water leapt from the fountain into the stone basin, and it was the only cool thing that day, the only thing promising coldness. The innkeeper didn't know you, a young man, alone, lost somewhere between the war years and what came after, with bags too heavy for so little content. She didn't ask where you came from or where you'd go. She brought you water and later wine, just like that, and set down a small plate of olives, black and gleaming like little stones. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, a blue deeper than the sky itself, a blue that only exists when heat burns everything else away. Rain came that day too, unexpected, out of the clear blue. The first drops, huge, warm, heavy like little pearls. They hit the stones like little bombs and evaporated at once, an explosion of steam rising and breaking the heat for a moment. People around you cried out. Some laughed. Some jumped up to run to the shadows. But you stayed sitting. You wanted to see it. You wanted to feel the heavenly cool touch you. More drops came, more and more, faster now, until finally all the stones gleamed like wet lead, and the scent rose up. This scent so intense it was almost like a living being. A scent stronger than food, stronger than music, stronger than any thought. The old man at the next table. You hadn't really noticed him until he started speaking. He'd been there since you arrived, quiet and withdrawn, a cup of coffee in front of him that was surely cold by then. His face was brown from the sun, wrinkled like dried fruit, and his eyes were gray, the color of stone. Not to you directly did he speak, but simply into the space, into this moment between rain and sky. He said only one word, a French word, you thought, though you didn't understand how he knew French in this Italian city. Petrichor, he said slowly, as if pronouncing a name that had long been lost. And then he smiled. Not at you, not at the innkeeper, not at the rain itself, simply at the rain, at the earth, at the world, as if greeting an old friend, someone he hadn't seen in a long time. You both sat there while the rain fell on the warm stones. The world wasn't still. The innkeeper ran back and forth. Other guests called to each other. The street outside was full of life. But between you and this old man was silence. No more words, no questions. Just this scent, this name for it that had been unknown to you until then. Petrichor. And the quiet realization that beauty had a name. That this moment had a name. This instant when sky and earth touched and something completely new was born. That the old man knew it. That you knew it now too. That the world wasn't random, but named. The innkeeper came out and pulled the green awning down a little further, and the light beneath the canopy became greener, greenish, a light like underwater. The rain grew stronger, became almost a storm, and the voices in the street fell silent. People hid. But here, under this awning, the old man simply sat, with his by now probably warm glass of wine, and stared at nothing and everything. His smile was gone, but his face wasn't empty. It was filled with something you couldn't name. You drank your wine too, slowly, and you watched the pattern of water falling from the awning. The water evaporated from the hot stones, even now, even in the rain, because the stones had been in the sun too long. And each new wave of rain brought new scent, more intense, more complex, with notes you hadn't noticed before. Petrichor, you repeated in your head, again and again. A spell. A secret that was no longer secret, but open to anyone who listened. At some point, you don't remember exactly when, the old man stood up. He moved slowly, as if something heavy held him, but not his body. His soul, perhaps. He paid quietly with the innkeeper, a few coins on the table, and she took them without counting. He nodded to you, not friendly, not unfriendly, simply recognizing, simply seeing, as if to say, "You understood. That's enough." Then he was gone, swallowed by the rain, a silhouette that vanished into the wetness until you didn't know anymore if he'd ever been there. And you stayed long after, hours perhaps, until the rain grew weaker and the sun came through again, pale and weak, but there, and the stones steamed like living, breathing beings that had just woken. The train sways gently beneath you. The rain still falls, still against the pane, against the darkness. And you ask yourself how long it's been raining, how long you've been listening and smelling. The window beside you is still open, and the scent, yes, it's still there, unchanged, deeper. Not Trieste anymore, but in this moment it makes no difference. It's the same rain, the same scent, the same petrichor, the name that means everything. The old stones in Trieste, the warm earth of this night, the memory of a moment when the world was simply beautiful. When an old man gave you a secret that's no longer one. And you think, there are people who lived their whole lives without knowing this name, without knowing what this scent is called. How sad that is. How rich you can feel for one moment, one name, one life so long ago. You close your eyes. The rain sings you its lullaby, a song older than your life, older than all life. The song of water falling from the sky and blessing the earth. Petrichor, you whisper silently, and the name is like a door opening to everything that was ever significant. A name for beauty, a name for time that's passed but hasn't disappeared. It sits here, beside you, in the scent, in the rain, in this night between stations. An old man in Trieste sits here too, perhaps, in your heart. The innkeeper with her awning, the stones drinking warm sun, everything is here. Everything is now. The rain connects it all, makes it into a moment that doesn't end. The Lighthouse Keeper. The Lighthouse Keeper. I met him on a night train running along the coast, somewhere between Hamburg and Copenhagen. An elderly man sitting at the window, gazing out to sea, though it was long dark and there was barely anything to see. Only occasionally, in the distance, the blink of a lighthouse. He'd see it before I did, every time, as if he'd developed a sixth sense for it, for light in darkness, for the gleam that others miss. We fell into conversation, the way you do on night trains. The darkness outside, the warmth inside, the rattle of the wheels. It makes people talkative. He told me he'd been a lighthouse keeper for 30 years. 30 years on a small island far out at sea. Just him, the lighthouse, and water all around. No neighbors, no shops, no street noise. I could barely imagine it. 30 years. That's half a lifetime. More than half my lifetime back then. And he told it as though it were the most natural thing in the world. As if there were no other way to live. The island was small, he said. So small you could walk around it in half an hour. A few rocks, some grass trembling in the wind, and the lighthouse in the middle. White and red striped, the way lighthouses look. His home was in the lower part of the tower. 2 rooms, a kitchen, a bed by the window where he could see the sea. Always the sea everywhere. That was my kingdom, he said. Small, but mine. And the sea was infinite. The sea was everything I needed. I asked him what a day looked like out there, how he filled the time when so alone. He smiled and said, every day was the same, yet each one was different. He'd risen with the sun, made coffee, checked his instruments, cleaned the lighthouse, polished the lenses, oiled the mechanisms, watched the birds, the weather, the sea. Small tasks that repeated, day after day, week after week, year after year. But it was never boring, he said. It was meditative, like a prayer you say every day, like a ritual that carries you. The sea was his calendar, he explained. He knew which month it was by the behavior of the waves. Winter brought the great storms, waves tall as houses crashing against the rocks, shaking the entire tower. Spring made the water calmer, and the birds returned, thousands of them, nesting on the rocks. Summer sometimes made the sea so still it looked like a mirror, silver and smooth and infinite. And in autumn came the fog, thick and white, swallowing everything, making the world disappear. "I needed no calendar," he said. "The sea told me what time it was. The sea told me everything I needed to know." He told me about the nights. That was his most important work, the nights. When the sun went down and darkness came, he'd switch on the light. That great, powerful light turning and turning and turning, shining out across black water, showing ships the way, warning them away from the rocks, bringing them safely home. He'd often stay up in the lamp room, watching how the light beam wandered through the night. It was hypnotic, he said. The light coming and going, like a heartbeat, like breath, like the island itself breathing. I asked if he was lonely. "Everyone asks that," he said, and he thought a long time before answering. "At first, yes," he said. "The first months were hard. The silence was so loud. I could hear my own thoughts, and some of them I didn't want to hear. The doubts, the fears, the questions. Everything you normally drown out with noise and distraction. But then something shifted. The silence became a friend. I learned to be with myself, really with myself, without distraction, without escape, without excuses. Just me and the sea and the light. And that was enough. That was more than enough." He told me about the animals that were his company. The seals sunning themselves on the rocks, watching him with their big, dark eyes. Curious, but never intrusive. The seabirds nesting on the lighthouse roof. He knew each pair, and they'd return each year, and he watched their chicks grow, named them, followed their stories. A fox that somehow reached the island, maybe over the ice in winter, and stayed for years, his only four-legged neighbor. "I talked to them," he said, "to the seals, to the birds, to the fox. They didn't answer, but they listened. That was enough. Sometimes listening is all you need." A boat came every 2 weeks with supplies: bread, tinned food, oil for the lamps, post if there was any, fresh water, tools, sometimes books. That was his contact with the world. A boat, twice a month, anchoring for an hour, then vanishing. "At first I waited for that boat like a holiday," he said. "I'd count the days, stand at the window, scanning the horizon. Later I barely noticed it. The island had become my world. Everything else was just memory, like a dream you had once." He told me about the storms. Those were the most intense nights. When the wind was so strong the tower trembled, when windows rattled, when you couldn't hear yourself speak, when waves crashed against the rocks and water sprayed up to his windows. He'd sit up in the lamp room then, making sure the light kept burning, because somewhere out there, in the darkness, in the chaos, ships needed his light. On those nights, he said, I felt most alive, most useful, most important. I was the only thing standing between the ships and the rocks. Just me and my light. I asked what he'd learned in all those years. He looked out the train window. Only darkness outside, and occasionally a distant light, a lighthouse perhaps, a brother of his. And then he said, "I learned that silence isn't empty. Silence is full, full of everything you don't hear when it's loud. Your own thoughts, your own breath, your own heartbeat. The roar of the sea that never stops. The wind always telling a different story. The birds, the seals, the rain on the roof. In the silence," he said, "I heard more than ever before in my life. I heard myself. And that was the most important thing." He told me about the day he left the island. After 30 years, the lighthouse had been automated, computers and sensors, no keepers needed anymore. He packed his things, not much, just one suitcase, stepped into the boat, and watched as the island grew smaller. The lighthouse, his home, his life, became a dot on the horizon. And then it was gone, dissolved into water and sky. "I didn't weep," he said. "I was grateful. 30 years with the sea and the light. 30 years with the silence and myself. How many people can say that?" We talked for a long time more while the train carried us through the night. About silence and light. About solitude and fullness. About what truly matters. Eventually, he fell asleep, the old lighthouse keeper, his head resting against the window. And I watched how the lights blinked in the distance, one after another. Lighthouses along the coast, still doing their work, still sending their light into the darkness. I think of him often, of his island, of his light, of his 30 years with the sea, of silence that's no enemy but a friend, of light that turns, coming and going, like a heartbeat, like breath, like life itself. The train continues on, and I sink deeper into the cushions. The night is still now, just the rattle of the wheels. Clack, 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 clack. The light turning, coming and going, coming and going. My eyes grow heavy. Silence is full, full of everything that was, full of everything that is. I met the Postwoman. I met the Postwoman in the Swiss Alps. At a small station whose name I've forgotten, one of those stations that's hardly more than a sign and a bench, and a timetable no one reads because everyone knows when the next train comes anyway. A station with more sky than roof, more silence than noise. I had time that day, plenty of time, and the next train wasn't due for 2 hours. So I sat on the bench, looked at the mountains, and waited. Waiting was difficult for me then, less so now. She came down the mountain path with a bag over her shoulder that looked far too heavy for a woman her age. She must have been 60, maybe older, with a face weathered by wind and sun, and eyes as clear as the mountain streams up here. Eyes that had seen much, paths and weather and years. She looked at me, smiled, and sat beside me as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Waiting for the train?" she asked. I nodded. "Then you've got time," she said. "Plenty of time. That's good." Time is the one thing you can't buy. We began to talk, the way you do when you have time and nothing better to do. She told me she was a postwoman, or had been, for she was just retiring. 40 years she'd carried letters up into the mountains, every day, in all weathers, to every farm and hut in that valley. Sun and rain, snow and storm. She knew every stone on her route, she said, every tree, every stream, every dog that would bark or greet her. After 40 years, she said, the path becomes like an old friend. You know every wrinkle, every peculiarity, every mood. I asked her how that was, walking the same path for 40 years. Doesn't it grow boring? Don't you get tired of it? She laughed, a warm, deep laugh that came from her belly, and said, boring? The path is different every day. In spring, the flowers bloom. Crocuses first, then primroses, then the whole mountain becomes a riot of color. In summer, the bees hum, and the meadows smell of hay and honey. In autumn, the leaves turn, and mist creeps through the valleys like some slow creature. In winter, the snow lies so deep you can barely get through, and everything is quiet. So quiet, you can hear your own heartbeat. The path is always the same, but it's never the same. That's the secret. That's the miracle. She told me about the people she delivered letters to. Old Mrs. Muller, who'd received a letter from her sister in Zurich every Tuesday for 30 years. Always Tuesday, always the same handwriting, always the same envelope. Farmer Hoffman, who never got any post but stood at his window every day anyway, waving when she passed. Just to see someone. Just to say hello. The Brunner family with 6 children who waited for their magazines like they were Christmas gifts. I knew their lives, she said. I knew who was ill, who'd married, who'd died. I knew who was waiting for good news and who was waiting for bad. I was part of everything, without really belonging, like a shadow passing through, but leaving traces behind. That way of living touched me, so connected to everything, yet so solitary. She told me that sometimes she was the only person some of those folks saw in a whole day. The old people living alone on their farms, far from everything. For them, her visit was the highlight of the day. She didn't just bring letters, she brought stories. News from the valley, about the weather, about neighbors, who'd had a calf, who'd broken an arm, who'd had visitors. She was the link to the world down below, the thread holding everything together. Once, she said, there was a terrible winter. So much snow that the roads couldn't be cleared for days. The snow piled higher than the fences, sometimes higher than the windows. The post office told her to stay home. It was too dangerous. The paths aren't passable. Stay home. But she went anyway, with snowshoes, for hours through the snow, because she knew old Mrs. Berger up on the mountainside was alone and waiting for her medication. They called me mad, she said. My neighbors, my colleagues, everyone. But I didn't do it for the post office. I did it for Mrs. Berger, for her eyes when she saw me, for her smile when I brought the medication. She told me about the dogs. Every farm had a dog, and she knew them all, their names, their quirks, their moods. Rex from the Steiner farm, who always pretended he wanted to bite, but really just wanted to play. His teeth were large, but his heart was larger. Little Bella from the Myers, who always walked beside her as far as the property line, then turned back as though there were an invisible boundary. Old Bello, who grew too old to bark and only wagged his tail when she passed. Slowly, wearily, but always. When Bello died, she wept. For a friend. Because that's what he was. The most beautiful days, she said, were the spring days, when the snow melts and streams rush everywhere, loud and merry, as if they were singing. When the first flowers push through the ground, crocuses, snowdrops, primroses. When the birds return and the air smells of earth and life, of beginning and new beginning. Sometimes I would stop, she said, just to look, to breathe, to be grateful that I could see it, that my eyes could see it, that my lungs could breathe this air. I asked if she'd never been afraid, alone in the mountains, in thunderstorms, in fog, in snow, with all the dangers that lurk there. She shook her head slowly, thoughtfully. The mountains aren't dangerous if you respect them. I knew every path, every shortcut, every shelter. I knew where to take cover when a storm came. I knew which paths to avoid in fog. And I knew the weather. I could smell it before it arrived. The rain, the snow, the storm. After 40 years, she said, the mountains were like an old married couple. We knew each other. We trusted each other. We looked after each other. She told me about the day she decided to stop. It wasn't a special day. No accident, no illness, no dramatic event. She'd simply been standing up on the pass, as she had 1,000 times before, looking down at the valley, at the roofs and the fields and the streams, and she knew. It's time. Not because I couldn't do it anymore, she said, but because I'd seen everything there was to see. Every season, every sunrise, every storm, every face, every story, every dog. It was complete. And when something is complete, you must let go. You have to let go. The train eventually came, and we said goodbye. She shook my hand, a firm, strong hand that radiated warmth and strength, and said, "Don't forget to stop sometimes. Even if you're not delivering post, even if you've nowhere to go, just to look, to breathe, to be." Then she headed back up the mountain, her empty bag now looking so light. I watched her until she disappeared around a bend, a small figure against great mountains. I think of her often, of her path through the mountains, 40 years, sun and snow, of the people who waited for her, of the dogs she knew, of the letters that brought joy or sorrow, and her, carrying it all, one step after another, day after day, year after year. The train rocks me gently, back and forth, and I close my eyes. Her words remain, sometimes stop, just to look, to breathe, to be. The train continues, through the night, and I let myself be carried. I met the painter. I met the painter on the line from Milan to Stresa at Lago Maggiore. The train passed through the Lombardy plain, flat and green and full of rice paddies gleaming in the afternoon sun like little mirrors. It was one of those Italian days when the air's warm and soft and smells of earth, of ripe tomatoes and jasmine. and everything moves just a touch more slowly than usual. The people, the conversations, the trains, especially the trains. She was sitting by the window, a woman of about 60, with short grey hair and a scarf that held so many colors it looked like a rainbow embracing someone. Before her, on the little fold-down table, lay an open sketchbook, and in her right hand she held a pencil, moving it lightly across the paper. Quick, flowing lines that looked like wind if you could draw it. She was sketching the landscape outside, but not exactly, not photographically, rather as though she were capturing the feeling of the landscape, the light, the vastness, the silence between things. I watched for a while without saying anything, because you don't disturb someone drawing the way you don't wake someone sleeping. But then she looked up, noticed me, and smiled. An open, warm smile that made her eyes glow. She had brown eyes, dark as chestnuts, with little flecks of gold in them, as though the sun had caught in them. "Do you like to watch?" she asked. I nodded, and she said, "Then watch. That's the most important thing there is. The looking." She was a watercolorist. For over 30 years, she told me, I've painted with water and color. Just water and color and paper. No oils, no acrylics, no canvas. Just these three things. The simplest ingredients in the world. And the light, of course. Light is the fourth ingredient, the most important one. Without light, there is no watercolor painting. Without light, there is, really, nothing at all. She told me she rises every morning at 5 and goes to the lake, to Lago Maggiore, to a particular spot known only to her, a little cove sheltered by oleander and old olive trees, overlooking the islands that lie in the water like sleeping creatures. There, she sits on a flat stone, still warm from the previous day's sun, and waits. Waits for the light. For the moment when the sun clears the mountains and touches the water. She doesn't bring much, she said. A small wooden box with her paints. Little china pans where the pigments sleep, dry and powdery until water wakes them. 2 brushes, no more than that. A broad one for sky and water, a narrow one for the details, the tiny things you almost miss. A heron's wingbeat, the shadow of a boat, the ripple where a fish has surfaced, and a glass of lake water in which she dips her brushes. Lake water, not tap water, she said, because the lake should be part of the painting, from the beginning. And then, she said, it happens. In the first minutes, when the light's still new, still uncertain, still tentative, that's when the lake shows its true colors. Not blue, not simply blue, but 1,000 colors at once. Rose from the clouds reflecting, gold from the sun just rising, green from the trees at the shore, silver where the wind makes small waves, violet in the shadows of the mountains. And between them, this incredible, translucent light that exists only on water. No painter can capture it, none. But you can try to feel it and bring that memory onto paper. The hardest thing about watercolor painting, she said, isn't the painting. It's the stopping. Because watercolor lives, you see. It moves. The water flows, the color wanders, the pigments settle and mix and find their own way. And you must know when to put the brush down, when to let go, when to leave the painting to itself. If you do too much, it dies. If you do too little, it stays empty. The art is this middle ground, this moment when you feel it's enough, that the painting breathes, that it lives. And then you must stop, immediately, without hesitation. And it's not just like that in painting, she said, gazing out the window at the rice paddies, now covered in a warm, golden shimmer. It's like that everywhere. In life, in conversations, in love. You must know when to let go, when to let the light slip away without chasing after it. Because it'll come back tomorrow. Different, yes. Never the same. But it comes back. The light always comes back. She showed me a picture from her sketchbook. A sunset over the lake, so delicate and translucent that the paper seemed to glow. The colors flowed into one another, orange into rose, rose into violet, violet into the deep blue of night. And between them were white spaces, places where she'd left the paper untouched, where no brush had been. Those are the most important places, she said, the empty ones, where the light shines through. A good watercolor is 1/3 painted and 2/3 empty. Like a good conversation, like a good night, like a good life. The train reached Stresa, and outside lay the lake, blue and calm and golden in the late afternoon light. She closed her sketchbook, adjusted her colorful scarf, and stood. At the door, she turned once more and said, "If you see the sky this evening, remember this. You can't hold the light. You can only see it, and remember it. And that's enough. That's more than enough. You must be able to let the light go." I think of those words often. Of her eyes where the sun had caught, of her colorful scarf, of the empty spaces in her paintings, more important than the painted ones, of the lake which held 1,000 colors and wanted to hold none of them. The train carries on, and outside it's grown dark. No lake anymore, no colors, just the night and the lights slipping past, gentle and even, like brushstrokes on a great dark canvas. My eyes are heavy, and I let go. The light, the images, the thoughts, I let it all go and sink deeper into the cushions, into the night, into the beautiful, warm emptiness, which is more important than anything you could fill it with. I met the Watchmaker. I met the Watchmaker on a train through the Jura. It was autumn, years ago now. One of those afternoons when the light turns golden and the world looks as though someone's laid a warm filter across it. The train was nearly empty. One of those regional services that winds slowly through valleys, past farmsteads and little villages whose names you forget the moment you hear them. But the landscape, that you don't forget. Soft hills, pastures full of cattle, the last sunflowers of the year bowing their heavy heads earthward. She was sitting opposite me, a small woman, perhaps in her late 70s, with white hair gathered loosely at the nape of her neck. It was her hands I noticed first. Small hands, but extraordinarily still. They lay in her lap like two contented creatures at rest. No fidgeting, no picking at her coat, No restless movement at all. Simply stillness. A stillness you rarely encounter. On the seat beside her sat a small leather bag, worn and old, with brass fastenings that gleamed in the light. We were quiet for a while, the way you are on trains with strangers when the silence is pleasant. Then the train took a curve rather more sharply than expected, and her bag shifted. I steadied it before it could fall, and she smiled and thanked me. And then she said something, quite casually, as though she were remarking on the weather. Watches. There are watches in there. I'm a watchmaker. Have been my whole life. I asked if I might see one, and she opened her bag and withdrew a pocket watch, so beautiful I found myself holding my breath. Gold, but not ostentatiously so. More like the shimmer of candlelight on old wood. The face was white, with numbers painted by hand, and the hands were thin and elegant as a spider's legs. She opened it very carefully and showed me its innards. Cogs, tiny as grains of sand, meshing and turning. A small universe of brass and steel. 60 years, she said. 60 years I've sat at my bench, under my lamp, with my loupe, peering into the hearts of watches. 60 years, and it still fascinates me. Every watch is different, you see. Each has its own character. Some are nervous. They tick quickly and restlessly, as though afraid of missing something. Some are calm. They tick slowly and steadily, like a quiet heartbeat. And some have stopped. Those are my favorites, the ones that have stopped. Why those? I asked. Why the broken ones? And she looked at me with those intelligent eyes that had gazed into so many watch mechanisms, so many springs and spirals and tiny screws, and said, because a watch that has stopped remembers. It remembers the moment it ceased to tick, the last second it counted. And when I repair it, when I wind the spring and coax the wheel back into motion, it awakens. It begins again. But it carries that moment of stillness within it, forever. And that makes it special. She told me about her workshop. A small room on the upper floor of an old house in La Chaux-de-Fonds, a town famous for watches, but hardly anyone visits anymore. A room with a single window looking out over rooftops, and beyond them, forests, and beyond those, mountains. A table of dark wood, worn smooth by 60 years of work. A lamp with a green shade. A loupe hanging on a stand. And silence. So much silence, she said, that you can hear the watches breathe. The walls, she said, are full of shelves, tiny drawers, hundreds of them, each labeled in the smallest handwriting. Springs, spirals, escapements, hands, crowns, crystals. Each drawer a little treasure. Each piece so fine you can barely see it with the naked eye. And the smell. Watch oil and old wood, and just a hint of the coffee she makes every morning before she picks up her first watch. That smell, she said, that's the smell of my life. When I catch it, I'm home, no matter where I am. In the mornings, she told me, when I unlock my shop, it's still dark. I switch on the lamp, sit at my bench, and then I hear them. All the watches at once, hundreds of them, ticking in different rhythms, different tempos. Some quick, some slow, some a touch irregular. And altogether, It sounds like rain on a roof. Not loud, not quiet, simply there. A sound that doesn't break the silence, but fills it. That's my morning prayer, you see. The ticking of my watches. I asked if she ever tired of it. The precision, the patience required to fit these tiny pieces together. And she shook her head slowly, thoughtfully, and said, "Do you know what I've learned in 60 years? That time doesn't pass. People always say time passes. Time runs, time flies, but it doesn't. Time transforms, the way water transforms, into steam, into ice, into clouds, into rain. It's always the same water. It goes nowhere. It only changes its form. And time is exactly the same. That moment when you saw snow for the first time as a child, that's not gone. It's transformed. It's here now, inside you, in your memory, in the smile you make when you think of it. Nothing is lost. Everything transforms. Outside, it was gradually growing dark. The golden hour had passed, and the light in the carriage grew warmer, more intimate. She placed the pocket watch back in its leather bag, very tenderly, the way you'd put a sleeping child back in its cradle. And then she looked out the window and said quietly, "Look at the sky. Do you see how it transforms? From gold to orange to rose to blue? People say the sun sets, but it doesn't set. It's always there. We're just turning away from it. And tomorrow we turn towards it again. And everything begins anew. Not anew. It transforms into a new day that carries the old day within it." She got off at a little station, whose name I've since forgotten, took her leather bag, nodded to me, and vanished into the twilight. A small woman with steady hands and wise eyes, who'd spent 60 years gazing into the hearts of watches, and in doing so, had understood something most of us spend a lifetime searching for. Time transforms. I think of that often. When I'm impatient, when I feel time slipping through my fingers, I remember her quiet hands, the ticking of her watches, her voice soft as the ticking itself. And then I breathe in and out and let time transform itself into what it will, without haste, without fear. The train carries on, the rattle gentle and regular, like the ticking of a great old clock, like 100 small watches sounding together like rain. My eyes grow heavy, and I sink deeper into the cushions, deeper into the night, deeper into the silence, which isn't empty at all, but full of memories that have transformed into warmth, into rest, into this moment here, in this train, in this night. Winter's come on you. Winter's come on, you see. I'm not entirely sure when, if I'm honest. Sometime between that last warm evening and the first hard frost, the world simply shifted. The trees are bare now, the nights stretch long and deep, and the sky's taken on this particular shade, this deep slate blue that you only get in winter. And here I am again, on a train, A night train this time, one of the old ones, with wooden paneling and heavy velvet curtains, and those little reading lamps that cast the most marvelous amber light. The sort of train you hardly see anymore, but it still runs somewhere or other, rattling through the darkness on some line I've almost forgotten. My compartment's small and cozy. A bed already folded down, with crisp white sheets and a blanket thicker than you'd think necessary, but absolutely right for a winter's night. The windows fogged with the warmth inside and the cold outside, and if I run my finger across it, I can just make out the city lights slowly falling away, one by one, like candles being gently blown out, ever so softly, ever so still. The train's begun to move. So gradually I barely noticed. First, that little jolt, then the gliding sensation, then this familiar rhythm. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. A rhythm older than I am, older than any story I know. A heartbeat made of steel and sleepers, rocking me off to sleep time and again, on so many journeys, through so many nights. I know this rhythm like my own breathing. Outside, it started snowing. I can see the flakes dancing in the lamplight, tiny, weightless things that can't quite decide whether to fall or float. They swirl and hover, and finally settle on the fields and rooftops we're passing. Everything's turning white. Everything's turning soft. Everything's turning quiet. There's precious little as lovely as watching snow slip past a train window. You're warm inside, and out there the world's being remade, and you needn't do a thing. Just watch. Just be. I got myself a cup of tea before we left. From the dining car, which has that same old-fashioned charm. Dark wood, brass fittings, a waiter with grey hair and an apron that's seen 1,000 journeys. The tea's chamomile, hot and fragrant, and I'm holding the cup with both hands, feeling the warmth seep through my fingers, into my palms, up my wrists. It's such a simple pleasure. A cup of tea, a warm compartment, snow at the window, and nowhere at all that you need to be. The train's crossing a flatland now, white and empty and endless. Here and there a farmhouse with its windows still glowing, yellow and warm in the blue night. I find myself wondering who lives there. Perhaps a family gathered at the table together. Perhaps someone reading alone, wrapped in a blanket, with a dog at their feet. Perhaps someone gazing out the window too, watching the train slip past, wondering where it's bound. We're passing a small station. Not one of the busy, noisy ones, but one of those quiet, forgotten places. A sign barely visible under the snow. A wooden waiting shelter with its roof thick with white. A single lamp casting its circle of light onto an empty platform. No one gets on. No one gets off. The train doesn't even stop. It just glides past ever so slowly, as though saying goodbye to a place it knows well. And then the station's gone, dissolved into the night, and before us lies white emptiness again. I draw the curtains back a little and rest my forehead against the cool glass. From here I can see the sky, deep and dark, but not black. More like dark ink someone stirred a few drops of silver into. The clouds are thin, translucent, and beyond them I sense the stars. Not bright and clear, but soft and diffuse, like lamps shining through a veil. The snow's nearly stopped now, just the odd flake drifting past the window, unhurried, aimless, as though it's got all the time in the world. I'm not going anywhere in particular. That's the beauty of it. There's no destination tonight, only the journey, only the track unfolding before the train like a long white ribbon. And the stories, the old stories that arrive all on their own in nights like this. Memories of people I've met, on trains like this one, in nights like this. People who've told me things I've never forgotten, not because they were important, but because they were true. I've met so many of them. The Watchmaker, who explained that time doesn't pass, it changes. The shepherd in the Carpathians, who knew the patience of mountains. The painter, who captured the light at Lago Maggiore. The old captain, who spent his life on the Danube. The beekeeper, who told me about the bees and their humming in the lavender. The carpenter from the Black Forest, who could read stories in the grain of wood. The lamplighter from Prague, who carried a small light into darkness every evening. And the cartographer, who knew the most beautiful paths, the ones that appear on no map. Each one gave me something, not things, but words, images, moods, little truths that you don't find in books, but only in the eyes of people who've lived long and seen much. And on nights like this, when the snow falls and the train runs and the world grows still, they come back to me. They sit beside me again, these people, and tell me their stories once more. And I listen, just as I did before, just as always. The tea's nearly gone now. Just a last sip, lukewarm and sweet. I set the cup down on the little table beneath the window and lean back. The pillows are soft. The bedding smells of fresh laundering and a hint of lavender. And the rattle of the wheels is like a lullaby sung just for me. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. The heating hums quietly beneath the window, a steady, warm current of air rising and setting the curtains trembling so gently, barely visible, just a whisper of fabric. I pull the blanket higher up to my chin and feel the warmth settle around me, like an embrace from someone who knows me well. My shoulders sink deeper into the pillows. My hands grow heavy. My fingers, which only moments ago were holding the tea, relax, one by one. And the snowflakes keep dancing at the window, slowly, silently. And I let my thoughts wander to all those faces, to all those voices, to all the nights in trains like this one, when someone told me something important, something quiet, something I've carried with me on all my journeys since. And now, on this winter's night, I want to tell them to you. These stories, one after another, slowly, gently, the way the snow falls, the way the train runs, without hurry, without end. The train carries on, through the night, through the snow, and my eyes grow heavy. Not tired, just content. As content as you can be when you're warm and safe and traveling, when the world out there's turning white and still, and you're sitting here inside, remembering, All those faces, all those voices, all those stories, waiting to be told again. Someday, in another night, just like this one. But now there's only the snow, and the rattle, and the warmth, and this beautiful, deep tiredness that feels like coming home, like arriving, like letting go. Sometimes on long night trains like this, I think of all the people I've met. Not just tonight, not just on this journey, but over all the years, all the trains, all the compartments, all the faces that were part of my life for a few hours. Strangers who became friends. For a night, for a moment, forever in my memory. The train travels on through the darkness, and I lie here, the blanket pulled up to my chin, and let the memories come and go. Like the lights outside, like the stations we pass. There were so many. Musicians and craftsmen, artists and laborers, people who lived their lives quietly, with dignity and patience, who told me their stories without expecting anything in return, who gave me wisdom they'd gathered over decades. Each one gave me something, a piece of their experience, a view of the world I hadn't known before. And I accepted it, grateful, amazed, sometimes without understanding what I'd been given. I sometimes wonder if they remember me too. If I'm a story they tell sometimes. The young man on the train who asked so many questions. The stranger with time to listen. Probably not. Probably I've long been forgotten, dissolved among all the other encounters they had. But that's all right. That's more than all right. I have their stories, and that's enough. That's more than enough. What have I learned over all these years, on all these journeys? I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps that every person has a story worth hearing. Perhaps that the most important lessons come from the most unlikely teachers, from people who never became famous, never appeared in books, never won prizes, but who lived, really lived, with open eyes and open hearts. I've learned from musicians that the pauses matter more than the notes, from people who worked outdoors that the path is never tedious if you look properly, from the lonely that silence is not empty, but full, from craftsmen that you cannot rush anything meant to turn out well. I've learned that we're all made of the same stuff. Stardust, someone once told me, and I believe it's true. Not just physically, but also metaphorically. We're all part of the same great whole, all on the way from somewhere to somewhere else, all searching for something we cannot name. And sometimes, in a train compartment at midnight, we find connection for a moment, real connection, without masks, without roles, without the stories we usually tell ourselves. The train rocks me, back and forth, back and forth. The rattle has grown quieter now, or I've simply grown used to it. It's like a heartbeat, like breathing, like the gentle rocking of a cradle. Outside, the night is deep and quiet, and somewhere out there are people sleeping, and people awake, and people sitting on other trains, carrying their own stories. We're all traveling, somehow, all on the move. Life is not only what we do, it's also what we don't do. the moments when we pause, the breaths between the words, the silence that holds everything together. I've learned this from people wiser than I, who've shown me that slowness is not weakness, that waiting is not a waste of time, that sometimes the most important thing is simply to be attentive, patient, open to what comes. I think of all the paths people have walked before me, the same paths year after year, and yet each day different. I think of the hands that have worked, that have shaped and created, that have left their marks on the world. I think of the eyes that have gazed at the heavens, at the stars and the sea, and the small wonders of the everyday. All these lives, all these stories, all these moments of beauty and sorrow and joy. My eyes grow heavy now. The lids fall, open again, fall. The train rocks me. The rattle sings me to sleep. I think of all the trains I'll still take, all the nights still to come, all the people I'll still meet, whose stories I don't yet know. Perhaps tomorrow someone will sit beside me and tell me something important. Perhaps I'm the one with a story to tell. We never know beforehand. That's what's beautiful about it. The lights outside grow fewer. We're passing through country without villages, without farms, just darkness and stars. The sky is so wide here, so open, so full of possibilities. Everything is connected. Everything belongs together. Everything is part of the same great whole. And I'm here, on this train carrying me, a small part of everything that is. The train is moving slower now, or is it just seeming that way? The rattle grows softer, gentler, like a song that's fading. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. I feel my body growing heavier, sinking into the mattress, everything becoming soft and wide. Thoughts dissolving, becoming images, becoming colors, becoming feelings without names. Faces appear, voices I've heard, words that have stayed. Everything mingles, everything flows into each other, the way dreams do. Music without instruments, paths without end, lights that turn, gardens growing in moonlight, waves coming and going. Everything at once, everything layered together, the silence between the notes. The path that's never tedious, the light that turns, comes and goes, comes and goes. The doe that rests, the stars that wait, the sea that gives, the garden that grows. All wisdom given to me, all preserved, all part of me. The night is so still now, so warm, so soft. The stories are told, the people sleep, the stars gleam. And I'm here, on this train, carrying me through the night, towards home, or somewhere else. It doesn't matter. Eyes falling, thoughts growing quiet. Just the rattle, ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. Like a heartbeat, like a breath, like the breath of the world, sleeping with me. All is well, all is quiet, all is exactly as it should be. The pauses between the notes, the silence that is full, the patience that knows no hurry, the connection that carries everything. Sleep now. Sleep. The train travels on. You don't need to watch. You don't need to do anything. Just breathe. Just be. Just dream. I met the gardener. I met the gardener on an evening train through Tuscany. The train moved slowly. So slowly you could count the vineyards, the cypress trees, the olive groves. The land was golden in the setting sun, and everything smelled of summer and earth, of ripening grapes and warm stone. He sat by the window, an older man with hands that looked like the roots of an ancient tree, gnarled and strong and full of history. Every wrinkle, every line in those hands spoke of years of work, of soil he'd shaped, of plants he'd tended. On his lap lay a small book, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking outside, at the gardens and fields sliding past, with eyes that saw everything. I asked if he was from the area. He smiled, a slow smile that transformed his whole face, and said, "Not from this area, no, but from a garden. Always from a garden." He'd been a gardener his whole life. 55 years, he said, I've made things grow. 55 years with my hands in the earth, my back to the sun, my knees in the grass, my eyes on what comes, what grows, what becomes. That was my life. The plants, the seasons, the cycle of sowing and harvest. Over and over, year after year, without end and without beginning. He told me about his garden. Not just any garden, his garden. The garden he'd tended over decades in a small village somewhere in the north. He'd inherited it from his father, who'd inherited it from his father. 3 generations of hands in the same soil, the same beds, the same paths, the same trees that grew larger with each generation. The apple tree in the corner, he said, my grandfather planted that. As a small seedling, no bigger than my arm back then. As a child, I played beneath it, in the shade of its leaves. As a man, I harvested its apples, year after year, baskets full of apples. And now it's older than I am, larger than I am, and will outlive me. That moved me, that idea. That a tree outlasts generations. That the work of one person lives on long after they're gone. That you can plant something that will still be there when you're only a memory. He nodded, as though he'd read my thoughts. That's the beautiful thing about gardening, he said. You plant for the future, not for yourself, never really for yourself. When I set out a tree, I know I'll never see its full glory. I won't be here when it reaches its maturity. But someone will be. My children, my grandchildren, strangers who come after me, people who'll never know my name, but they'll sit in the shade of my tree. That's enough. That's more than enough. He told me about the seasons. For a gardener, he said, there's no bad weather, only different tasks, only different gifts. In spring, the sowing, the planting, the hoping. When the earth grows soft and the first shoots break through the soil. In summer, the tending, the watering, the waiting, The long, hot days when everything grows so quickly you can almost watch it. In autumn, the harvesting, the gathering, the giving thanks. The baskets full of apples, the pumpkins, the last tomatoes. And in winter, the resting, the planning, the dreaming of next year, when the garden lies beneath the snow and everything sleeps. Every season has its purpose. Every season is necessary. Even winter, which looks so empty. So much happens under the earth that we never see. I asked him what the most important thing was that he'd learned. He looked at his gnarled hands, turned them over as though seeing them for the first time. The wrinkles, the lines, the marks of time. Patience, he said. Always patience. That's the first and the last. You cannot force a plant to grow. You can't threaten it or bribe it or persuade it. You can only tend it, give it what it needs. Water, light, good soil, and then wait. The plant knows itself when it's ready. It follows its own rhythm, not mine, never mine. He told me about failure. In 55 years, he said, many things didn't grow. Seeds that didn't germinate, that remained in the earth and never saw the light. Seedlings that didn't survive the frost, frozen in a single cold night. Trees that got sick and died, despite all my care, despite all my love. Roses eaten by beetles, tomatoes that rotted in the rain. But that belongs too. That's not failure. That's not a mistake. That's part of life. You cannot control everything. You cannot save everything. You can only do your best, and then let go. Nature decides in the end, not me. Never me. He told me about his favorite moment. His eyes glowed like a child's. Early in the morning, he said, when the sun is just rising and the dew is still on the leaves, when everything sparkles and gleams as though dusted with diamonds, when everything is still and the birds are just beginning to sing. Then I stand in my garden and look around, and everything is alive. Everything grows. Everything is exactly as it should be. In those moments, he said, I feel rich, richer than any king, because I'm part of something larger than myself, part of this cycle that's been going on for millions of years and will continue for millions more. I'm only a small part of it, but I am a part. He told me about the worms. I know it sounds odd, who talks about worms, but he said, the worms are the true gardeners. They work beneath the earth day and night, without pause, without thanks. They transform the dead into the living, leaves into soil, soil into nourishment. Without them, no garden would be possible. Without them, nothing would grow. And we never see them, we never think of them, but they do their work, silent and invisible, year after year. Sometimes, he said, I think we humans should be like that. Do our work without expecting recognition. Know that we're part of something larger, that our small work is part of a great whole. That's enough. That has to be enough. I asked if he missed his garden. He was on his way to his daughter, far from home, far from his soil. He smiled. but his eyes were a little damp. "Every day," he said. "Every single day. I dream of it. I wake up and think of the roses, whether they're being watered, of the tomatoes, whether they're ripe, of the apple tree, whether the apples are falling. But I've shown my grandson how to plant, how to water, how to wait. And he understands. He has that joy in his eyes when something grows, that excitement when the first sprout breaks through the soil, that patience when you have to wait. That's my legacy. Not the garden itself, but the knowledge of how to love a garden." He told me about his last great project, a cherry tree he planted 3 years ago. Just a small tree, barely larger than a child, thin and fragile, with only a few leaves. "In 20 years," he said, "it'll be enormous, full of blossoms in spring, pink and white, like a cloud, full of fruit in summer, sweet and dark red. I won't see that, I know it. That's all right. But my grandson will sit beneath that tree and eat cherries. And perhaps, someday, he'll tell his own grandchildren, 'My grandfather planted this tree a long time ago, when I was just a child.'" We talked for a long time more as the train traveled through the dusk. The vineyards became shadows. The cypress trees became black lines against the orange sky. He spoke of roses and tomatoes, of weeds and compost, of everything that grows and fades and grows again. At some point he fell asleep, his small book on his chest, his gnarled hands folded as though in prayer. And I looked out the window and imagined gardens growing everywhere, silent and persistent, whilst we slept. I often think of him, of his hands that planted so much, of his cherry tree growing somewhere now without him, of the patience that knows no hurry. You sow, and then you wait. You give what you can, and then you let go. Things grow when they're ready, not before, not after. Exactly when it's time. The train travels on, through the night now completely dark. Only sometimes a light in the distance, a village, a farm, a life. Somewhere out there, gardens grow in moonlight. Roots dig deeper into the earth. Leaves breathe softly in the darkness. Everything follows its rhythm. Slowly, steadily, without hurry. And I sink deeper into the pillows and let myself be carried, like a seed waiting for spring. I met the fisherman. I met the fisherman on a night train along the Baltic Sea. The train ran so close to the water that sometimes you could see the moonlight on the waves, silvery and still, like liquid light that moved without hurry or purpose. He sat across from me, a man with a weather-beaten face and hands that looked as though they'd spent their whole life hauling nets. Strong hands, but not harsh. Hands that knew how to grip, but also how to release. He smelled of salt and sea, even here in the train, far from the water. Some people carry the sea inside them wherever they go. It becomes part of them, like breath, like heartbeat. He'd been a fisherman for as long as he could remember. "My father was a fisherman," he said, "and his father before him, and his before him. We have the sea in our blood, 5 generations who went out on the water before sunrise, in storm and calm, in summer and winter. The same boat, always repaired, always patched, but at heart, the same boat. I could barely imagine it, devoting one's whole life to the rhythm of the sea, to tides, to weather, to the whims of the fish, to currents that change without warning. But he spoke of it as though there were no other way to live, as though anything else were unimaginable. "The sea is no enemy," he said. "Some people think it is. They see the storms, the waves, the danger. They read of ships that sink, of fishermen who don't return. But the sea is just the sea. It gives and it takes. It's generous and it's cruel. But it's never malicious. It's never deliberate. It simply is what it is. Like the sun, like the rain, like time." "After 50 years on the water," he said, "I've learned to accept that. You don't fight the sea. You never fight something larger than yourself. You learn to live with it. You learn to read it. You learn when you can go out and when you're better off staying home." He told me about the mornings. Every day at 4 o'clock, he gets up, before the sun, before the birds, drinks a coffee in the darkness whilst his wife still sleeps, whilst the village is still quiet, listens to the sea even through closed windows. "You hear its mood," he said. "You hear whether it's calm or restless." Then he goes down to the harbour where his boat waits, the boat that belonged to his father and his grandfather. Gets in, starts the engine, goes out, always the same route, always past the lighthouse, past the rocks, out to open water. And yet each day is different. The light is different. The waves are different. The birds fly different patterns. Nothing truly repeats. Only the habit repeats. Everything else is always new. He told me about waiting. "That's what a fisherman does most," he said. "You cast the nets, and then you wait. Hours sometimes. The sun rises slowly, in colors you never see on land. Orange and pink and gold, reflected in the water, doubled, tripled. The seagulls circle. The boat rocks gently. The engine is off. And you wait. You cannot force the sea to give you something. You can only be ready when the time comes." "Patience," he said. "That's all a fisherman needs. Patience and humility. And the willingness to come home with empty hands. That happens more often than you'd think. And you have to learn to live with it." That humility moved me. In a world where everyone wants everything instantly, where everyone wants to control everything, where impatience has become a virtue, here was this man who'd spent his whole life waiting, accepting, taking what comes and being grateful for it. He told me he had good days and bad ones. Days when the nets were so full he could barely haul them, heavy with fish, the boat riding deeper in the water. And days when he came home with almost nothing. A few small fish, hardly enough for supper. "Both belong," he said. "You can't want only the good days. You can't want only to harvest without sometimes coming up empty. The sea teaches you that. The sea teaches you humility." He told me about the storms, the worst nights, when the sky goes black and the waves tower above the boat, when the wind is so loud you can't hear anything else, when water washes over the rail and you have to hold on. That's when you feel, he said, how small you are, how humble, how little you need except the ground beneath your feet and the sky above your head. But strangely, he said, those are also the nights when I feel most alive, when everything is at stake, when it's only about getting through, surviving, getting home. Then you know what matters. Then all the other worries suddenly seem so unimportant. The money, the bills, the small annoyances of daily life, all meaningless. He told me about the silence. In the morning, when the boat is far out and the engine is off, when you only hear the water against the hull and the seagulls in the distance, when the sun is just rising and the sea turns golden. This silence, he said, doesn't exist anywhere else. It's the silence of the sea. It's different from the silence on land. It's full of vastness, full of possibility, full of life you don't see but feel, beneath the surface, in the depths, everywhere. Sometimes I just sit there, he said, and listen to the sea, to the wind, to the waves, to myself. Those are the best moments. The moments when I know why I do this, why I couldn't do anything else. I asked him what the most important thing was that he'd learned from the sea. He thought for a long time, looked out the train window where moonlight fell on the distant water, silvery and still. The sea gives when it's ready, he finally said. Not when I want it to. Not when I need it. Not when I deserve it. But when the time is right. When it has come. When everything comes together. That applies to everything in life, he added. To fish, to fortune, to love, to peace. You can't force it. You can only be there, be ready, and wait. Wait patiently. And when it comes, then be grateful. Then take it with both hands and be grateful. He told me about his last catch. Not quite the very last, but soon. He's getting old, he said, and the sea forgives no mistakes. The hands aren't as strong anymore, the eyes not as sharp. The bones ache when the wind is cold. Soon he'll have to stop. His son will take the boat, the 6th generation, and he'll sit at the harbour and watch the others go out. I'll miss the sea, he said, but I'll see it every day. Wake every morning and look at the water. Breathe in the smell. Listen to the seagulls. That's enough. That's more than enough. We talked for a long time more as the train travelled through the night. About the sea and waiting. About patience and humility. About a life that gives and takes like the tides. About storms and silence. About good days and bad. At some point, the old fisherman fell asleep, his head leaning against the window, and I could swear I heard the sea roaring, quietly, to the rhythm of his breathing. Waves that come and go, tides that rise and fall. I often think of him, of his boat rocking on the waves, of his hands that have hauled so many nets, of his eyes that have seen so many sunrises, of his patience, deeper than the sea. The sea gives when it's ready. I've carried that with me since. This readiness to wait, this humility before what is greater than we are. The train travels on. The rattle is gentle and steady, like waves washing to shore, like the sea breathing. My eyes grow heavy, and I let myself drift, like a boat on the water, without destination, without hurry. Only the rocking and the silence and the night carrying me along. I met the astronomer. I met the astronomer on a night train through Switzerland. It was a clear night, one of those nights when the sky is so black and the stars so bright that you feel you could touch them. The moon was absent, or perhaps just a sliver, and so the stars shone all the brighter. She sat by the window, her forehead nearly pressed against the glass, looking upward. Not outward, upward, at the stars. I watched her sitting there, completely absorbed, and eventually she noticed my gaze and smiled. "A beautiful night," she said. "A perfect night for stars." Her name was Margarita, and she'd been an astronomer her whole life. 50 years at observatories and universities, 50 years with telescopes and calculations and the heavens above. Now she was retired, but the stars, she said, don't let go of you, even after 50 years, perhaps especially then. "I only travel at night now," she explained. "By day the sky is empty, only blue, only bright, only tedious. But at night it's full of stories, full of secrets. You only have to know where to look." She showed me the constellations through the train window, which was a bit fogged by our breath. She traced lines between the stars with her finger on the glass. "There," she said, "that's Orion, the hunter. Do you see the 3 stars in a row? That's his belt. And up there, the bright star, that's Betelgeuse, his shoulder. It's a red giant," she said, "so large that if you put it where our sun is, it would reach to Mars, perhaps further still." I tried to imagine it and couldn't. The numbers were too vast, the distances too great. But she spoke of it as though it were the most ordinary thing, as though she was speaking of a neighbor she knew well. She explained to me that the light we see is old, very old. The light from Betelgeuse, she said, has been traveling about 600 years before it fell into your eye tonight. 600 years. When that light was sent out, Columbus hadn't yet been born. The Renaissance was just beginning. The world was different, entirely different. And the light has been traveling since. Through nothingness, through cold, through darkness. Across distances we cannot fathom, only to be seen by you tonight. By you, here, on this train. That touched me in a way I couldn't explain. The notion of looking up at the sky and seeing the past. That light is a message, a dispatch that took hundreds, thousands, millions of years to arrive. And I am the recipient. I, here, now. When we look at the stars, she said, we're always looking into the past. We see what was, not what is. The sky is a history book, written in light. and we are the readers, standing at the end of the story. She told me about her work. For 50 years, she'd observed stars, collected data, made calculations, night after night, year after year. She'd spent nights in observatories, on mountains, in deserts, on islands. Everywhere, the sky was dark and clear, where no city lights drowned out the stars. My colleagues always asked if it didn't grow tedious, she said. The same stars every night, the same calculations, the same data. But they don't understand. The stars are never the same. They move, they change. They're born and they die. You only have to look carefully. You only have to be patient enough. She told me about shooting stars. They're not stars, you see, she said. They're grains of dust, tiny pieces of comets and asteroids, no bigger than a grain of sand, sometimes even smaller, that fall into our atmosphere and burn up. Imagine, she said, a grain of dust travels millions of kilometers through space, for years, for decades, perhaps for centuries, all alone, all silent, through infinite emptiness. And then, in a single moment, it becomes this beautiful light in the sky. Its entire existence, its whole journey, compressed into a moment of shining. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that incredible? I asked her if she'd ever felt small, faced with this infinity. She smiled, that smile of someone who's heard this question often but still ponders it each time. Yes, at first, she said. When I was young and first understood how large the universe is, how unimaginably large, how insignificant our Earth is, our solar system, our entire galaxy. Then I felt lost, tiny and insignificant, a speck of dust on a speck of dust on a speck of dust. But then, she continued, I saw it differently. I turned it around. We're made of stardust, you see. It's not just poetry, it's science. Every atom in our body was born in a star, billions of years ago. The carbon in our cells, the oxygen in our lungs, the iron in our blood, all was forged in stars that died long ago. We're not separate from the universe. We're part of it. We are the universe, observing itself. That's no reason to feel small. That's a reason to feel connected to everything that is and was and will be. The train passed through a tunnel, and for a moment the stars were gone. Only darkness, only the rhythm of the wheels, only the hum of the tunnel around us. And then we emerged again, and the sky was there again, so wide and so full, as though it had been waiting for us. She looked upward and whispered, "There you are again," as though greeting old friends who'd briefly vanished. She told me of her favorite night. It was in Chile, in the Atacama Desert, the driest place on Earth. The sky there, she said, is different from anywhere else. So clear, so dark, so pure, that you can see the Milky Way like a band of light, like a river flowing across the sky. I was alone on a hill, she told me, at 2 a.m, completely alone. And I looked up, and I wept. Not from sadness, not from loneliness, from being overwhelmed, from gratitude that I was allowed to see this, that I could be part of it, that my eyes, These small eyes made of stardust could see the heavens. I asked her what she'd learned over all those years beneath the stars. She thought for a long time, looked out the window where Orion slowly wandered across the horizon, continuing his eternal hunt. I learned, she finally said, that time is relative. Not just in the physical sense, as Einstein meant it, but in the human sense. What is a life compared to a star? A blink, a breath. And yet, in that blink, we can love, we can learn, we can wonder. That's not less valuable because it's brief. Perhaps it's more valuable. Perhaps the brief thing is the precious thing. At some point I grew tired, and she noticed my eyes growing heavy, my head falling to the side. "Sleep peacefully," she said. "The stars will still be there when you wake. They're always there, even when we can't see them. During the day, when the sky is blue, they're still there. Behind the clouds, behind the light, behind everything. They wait for us with infinite patience, hundreds of light years of patience. What is a few hours of sleep compared to that?" I fell asleep to the sound of the train and the image of stars before my closed eyes. Orion and Betelgeuse and the Milky Way, all woven into my dreams. When I woke, it was light, and she was gone. Stepped out somewhere whilst I slept, without farewell, without a word. But I thought of her for a long time afterwards, of her stars, of the light that had traveled millions of years, of the stardust we're made of the connection that links everything to everything. The train rocks me now, back and forth, so gently. The night is deep and still, and my eyes grow heavy. We're made of stardust, light that has traveled millions of years, the connection that links everything to everything. I am part of it. We all are. And with that thought, I sink deeper into the pillows, into the night, into the stars.